My name is Samantha, I'm 33, and on that very ordinary Tuesday I was sitting in my home office, confident that the day would pass as usual, with the quiet hum of the system unit and the steady light of the monitor, while I laid out new logic in the code that will last me until lunch and a little later. I work as a programmer in a large tech company, nothing romantic, but understandable, honest and stable, and, if you take away modesty, they pay there so that I have long ceased to be nervous about checks and can afford good tools, decent furniture, and time for myself without a painful feeling of guilt. 4 years ago, I took a risk and bought a house with a mortgage, and the best thing I did was to allocate a bright room with a view of the courtyard for work, set up my office there and learn to close the door at 6 in the evening, because the house must be not only an office, but also a refuge, and the remote policy of the company gave me the luxury of working from anywhere. Life was going well overall, especially after I met Marcus online a year ago. He lives in another state, and we quickly turned our correspondence into trips to meet each other, he to me, I to him, and it began to seem to me that maybe it was worth selling the house and moving closer, because I could connect to the servers from any living room, where there would be reliable internet and his laughter. That morning, I was typing on the keyboard when the mail gave the usual ding, and although I usually do not open emails in the stream mode, something made me check the notification, especially since it came to an old address that I almost abandoned. The sender knocked the air out of my lungs, Mom, and everything inside me twisted, because I had not spoken to my family for 5 years, no calls, no holidays, and there was a good reason for this, which even the most patient do not like to remember. Take a step back. I have parents, both now in their 60s. I have a sister, Sarah, 3 years older than me. She is 36, she is married to David, and, in short, both of them are a whirlwind of impulsive ideas and chaotic decisions. 5 years ago it was different. I talked to everyone, earned well, rented an apartment and saved for a house so persistently that coffee on the way to work seemed like a luxury. By the time I was talking about, I had $120,000 in my account, and I was proud of this figure as a recognition of my own adulthood, because it was supposed to turn into a payment and make the future mortgage easier. On Saturdays, I came to my parents for dinner. It was our warm habit, and I even loved it, but one Saturday came, after which everything changed. I came in, said hello, put down my bag and saw that Sarah and David were already excitedly explaining something to Mom and Dad. I sat down at the table, and my mother turned to me, beaming. Sarah is starting her own business, she has a great plan, we are sure that everything will work out, she said in the same voice that she used to announce a holiday when I was a child. I smiled, but inside I cringed, because this was not her first start. Sarah had tried twice before, both times she ended up in debt, and each time her parents closed the accounts and pretended that risk was a school of life, and I kept silent, so as not to seem angry and calculating. Sarah jumped up in her chair. I have everything calculated, Samantha, I need some money for development, and she and David simultaneously turned to me, looking as if the answer should already be yes, as if the number of the safe was written on my face. Why are you looking at me like that? I asked, and Sarah immediately softened her intonation, as always when she wanted to get her way. I know you were saving for a house, you have $120,000 in your account, she said in a sweet voice, and a string stretched coldly in my chest. I will not invest money for a house in your business, Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice even, and then she, defending herself, went on the attack. I thought it all through. In a couple of years I will double the investment and return you $240,000. This will be the best decision for all of us, we will finally become a team. I laughed, quietly and briefly, not because I wanted to hurt, but because I heard the all too familiar music of promises and realized that now was the very scene beginning, after which it was no longer possible to pretend that nothing had happened. The laughter broke out on its own, childishly and quietly, and I realized there was no strength to hold it back. Sarah, I said then, sitting at that very table in my parents' house, you've already tried to start a business twice, and both times it ended in debt and disappointment. Maybe it's time to stop with these adventures and find yourself a regular job, as many of us do, because not all dreams have to turn into projects, and sometimes stability is also happiness. But as soon as the words left my lips, everything, as if on cue, went to hell. Sarah's face flushed crimson, she sobbed, jumped up from her chair and, bursting into tears, ran out of the room, loudly slamming the door, and David, throwing a contemptuous idiot in my direction, rushed after her, leaving me alone with my parents. For a moment I thought that now that the noise had died down, Mom and Dad would finally hear my voice of reason and understand that I didn't wish my sister any harm, but was simply trying to protect us all from another collapse. But I was wrong. They pounced on me without a pause, as if they were waiting for the moment to accuse. Mom, in a desperate intonation, called me cruel. Dad said that I was selfish and greedy, and all this because I told the simple truth. I tried to explain that Sarah's new business would drag her into debt again, that history would only repeat itself, but Mom didn't listen and at some point struck with words that took my breath away. Sarah is more talented than you, Samantha, and you're just jealous of her success. And then Dad, leaning heavily back in his chair, pronounced his verdict: either I give my sister 120,000, or they cross me out of the family forever. I looked at these two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, no matter what I did, and something snapped inside me. I won't give her my money, I said quietly but firmly, and in that moment I heard the last bridges crumble. They had thrown me out of my own home, my own mother and my own father, telling me to leave and never come back. The next day, I changed my phone number, made sure none of them could contact me again, and closed that door tight. A year later, I finally bought the house I had planned, and since then, I have lived on my own for 5 years, building my life the way I saw fit. I had heard from mutual friends that Sarah had actually started her own business, and, surprisingly, this time everything went smoothly. She and David bought a beautiful house, traveled a lot, showing off luxurious photos on social media. I was genuinely glad she had succeeded, but I still didn't want anything to do with them, because I remembered too well the price of what they had done to me. And so, when I saw the name Mom in my old mailbox, such a chill ran through me that my hands shook as I clicked on the letter. Samantha, we need to see you urgently. It's a matter of life and death. Please come home, she wrote, and the first thing that came to my mind was that someone was dying. No matter how much resentment I had, my heart was not made of stone, and if it was about illness or death, I could not stay away. I realized that they had found my old mail because they no longer had any way to reach me. I sat in front of the screen for a long time, not knowing what to do. Part of me screamed, delete and forget, you don't have to get involved in their games again, but another part whispered, what if your dad has a heart attack, what if your mom has cancer? You won't forgive yourself if you don't even know the truth. In the end, I typed a short reply, I'll come this Saturday. And that was it. That night, I barely slept a wink, endlessly replaying dozens of possible scenarios in my head, from the hospital to a conciliatory hug, from a funeral silence to another accusation. Saturday morning arrived faster than I wanted. And I got behind the wheel with a lump in my stomach, as if I was driving not to meet my parents, but to an exam that was impossible to pass. When I turned into a familiar neighborhood, everything seemed smaller than in my memory, the houses seemed to shrink, the streets grew dim, and my heart beat in my chest, as on the day when I left them forever. As I approached the house, I noticed 2 cars at the side of the road, Sarah's black Porsche and David's silver Mercedes, both shiny, new, ridiculously expensive. I immediately understood, the meeting would not only be with my parents, but with them as well, which meant that this was not about illness, but about family, about what I had long since left behind. I sat in the car for a few more minutes, clutching the steering wheel, gathering the last of my courage, and only then did I get out and go to the door. I knocked, and my mother opened the door almost immediately. We paused on the threshold, looking at each other, and I noticed how much she had changed. Her face was drawn, new wrinkles appeared at the corners of her eyes, her voice was trembling, as if she was constantly on the verge of tears. Samantha, she said, thank you for coming, and I, not knowing what to say, stepped inside. Everything in the living room was as before. Dad was sitting in his chair, sullen and heavy, Sarah on the sofa next to David, her eyes puffy and red, as if she had recently cried a lot. The strange thing was that they all, despite the past, looked almost happy to see me, and yet at the same time there was anxiety on their faces, as if they were here to say something that would change everything again. I remained standing, not wanting to get too comfortable, and, trying to remain firm, asked, what's going on? The letter said it was a matter of life and death. Mom sank heavily into the chair opposite and, unable to bear it any longer, began to cry. "It's about Sarah," she said, and the room fell silent, and my ears began to ring. Mom exhaled as if she had been carrying a stone on her chest all her life, and said that Sarah was in serious trouble, and I automatically looked at my sister, who hid her face and did not try to meet my eyes, and David was holding her hand and looking scared. "What trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Dad cleared his throat, as if about to announce the verdict, and said that her business had collapsed 3 months ago, that the bank wanted everything back immediately and had already taken the house, and I felt bitterness and a heavy sense of rightness. I felt very sorry, because losing a roof over your head hurts, but part of me silently repeated, "I told you so," and I still only said out loud, "I'm sorry to hear that, but what does that have to do with me?" Mom wiped her eyes and, without looking at me, whispered that the troubles didn't end there, because even after losing the house there were debts left, and not to the bank, but to people you don't mess around with, and that there were only deadlines and demands ahead. Sarah finally spoke in a whisper, 150,000, and I, not believing it, asked again, "Who do you owe 150 to?" And David answered instead that they were private investors, that they didn't accept "I'll pay you later" and called every day, and that they had already moved on to threats, because they knew where they lived now, they knew their routine. "We're scared, Samantha," Sarah said, and I believed her because the fear in her eyes was thick as a bruise, shaking, making her look 10 years older. I felt sorry for them, but I still didn't understand why I had to be here, and my heart ached unpleasantly, so I said calmly, "It's terrible, but I still don't see what you want from me." Then my mother looked up at me with reddened eyes and dropped a bomb that made my fingers go cold. They knew I'd bought a house, a nice house, and they thought I should sell it and help Sarah pay off her debts. I stared at her as if my mother had grown a second head, and breathed out, "Are you out of your mind?" And my mother immediately retorted in that soft tone from my childhood, like I was young and could earn enough to buy another house. But if I didn't pay the money back, Sarah and David could be in real danger. I looked at them all and very slowly repeated my thoughts out loud, so that they would understand exactly. 5 years ago, you threw me out of this family for refusing to finance yet another venture. Now this venture has collapsed loudly, and you want me to sell my house to save what you called Sarah's fate. Family helps family, Dad said, and did not even look away. I grinned, and the sound came out burnt. You called me not family, remember, you crossed me out completely and closed the door in front of me. Sarah burst into tears even harder and, covering her face with her hands, croaked that we used to do stupid things, but now everything is different, because these people will not sue, they will cause pain. Then you should have thought of that before borrowing from the loan sharks, I said, and David, flushing, leaned forward sharply, saying that I didn't understand the pressure they were living under. That's true, I don't understand, I said, but I saw 2 very expensive cars by the side of the road. Start with them and pay off part of the debt. We need these cars for work, he answered through his teeth, and Sarah, as if breaking down, sobbed and whispered that without them they would lose the contracts. And without security, you will lose much more, I said, and at that moment my mother stood up abruptly, came almost right up to him and said in a crisp voice, "If you sell my house, you can pay off Sarah's debts and still have enough left over for a nice apartment." A nice apartment, echoed in my mind, and I felt the anger growing, thick and hot. Mom, I worked for years, saved every penny, this house is my work and my refuge, and I'm not going to sell it to patch up someone else's mistakes. She's your sister, Dad said harshly. And she's a grown woman who made her own choices, and bad ones, I answered, and Sarah immediately jumped up, almost shouting that I had to help, had to care about what was happening to her. And where was that family loyalty of yours 5 years ago, when you told me in unison to disappear? I asked, and in response there was only one thing, heavy and discouraging, that everything was different then, and as if the past could be undone with one phrase. Mom pressed her lips together and said what she thought should have put an end to the conversation, "It was different, Samantha. Then you wouldn't help me by keeping your money, and now I don't want to help you with your problems if you ever have any." The room fell silent, and I could feel their eyes on me, as if I was the villain, even though all I had done was refuse to let them dictate my life again. "I won't do it," I said firmly. "Sarah got into this mess herself, and she needs to get out of it." If you want to save her so much, sell your house and give her the money. My mother gasped as if I'd hit her and stammered, "This is the only house we have, we're old, Samantha, we can't start over like you can." I just chuckled, because that was exactly how I felt. Now you understand how I feel about my house. I turned and walked towards the door, but behind me I heard Sarah's desperate cry, "You're making a terrible mistake, these people don't forgive." I turned around, met her gaze and quietly replied, "Me too," and then left them sitting in that room, crushed by their own decisions, and went back to my house. When I got home, the first thing I did was block my mother's email address and felt a sense of calm growing inside me. That was it, I had enough, I was done with their drama. A week of amazing peace passed, no call, no letter, not a single hint that they would try to drag me into their problems again. I even began to think that they finally realized that I was not their personal ATM, and this realization brought relief. Marcus called every day, and I told him everything as it was, without hiding the details. He listened and repeated the same thing, "You did the right thing, Samantha. They can't come back 5 years later and expect you to fix their problems." His support warmed me. I was starting to believe that I had made the right decision, and although there was still a little pain inside for Sarah, I knew that it wasn't my fault or my responsibility. I had my own life, my own worries, and I shouldn't sacrifice everything for those who had already betrayed me once. But on Tuesday morning, the silence was shattered. I was standing in the kitchen, making coffee and enjoying the aroma, when I heard a car door slam outside. I went to the window and almost dropped my mug. Mom and Dad were walking up the path to my house. How the hell did they find my address? Flashed through my mind. I threw open the front door before they could knock, and the rage immediately burst out, "What are you doing here? How did you even know where I live?" Mom, with some strange pride on her face, replied, "Sarah hired a private detective. We need to talk to you face to face, because you blocked my email." I couldn't believe my ears. "A private detective? Are you serious?" Dad was looking around my house as if he was checking it out, and I could see the numbers spinning in his head. "This is a nice place," he said. "It must be worth a lot." "Get your eyes off my property," I snapped. But Mom had already squeezed past me and walked inside, as if it all belonged to her. Dad followed her, and I froze for a second, amazed at their audacity. "Don't settle in," I said. "You're not staying here." Meanwhile, Mom was walking around the living room, touching things as if checking to see if they suited her. "If you sold this house," she noted, "you could easily pay off Sarah's debt and still have enough left over for a decent apartment." "I already told you, I'm not selling my house," I answered firmly. Dad spread his arms, looking around the room. "But this is too much for you alone. You don't need all this space." "What I need is none of your business," I snapped. Mom turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Sarah is really scared. Those people called her again yesterday. They said that if they don't get the money by the end of the month, something terrible will happen." "Then let Sarah go to the police," I suggested. "The police won't help here," Dad intervened. "These are people who aren't afraid of warrants and papers." I felt my frustration turning to anger. "It's not my problem anyway. You have to go." But my mother crossed her arms over her chest and said with cold determination, "We're not leaving until you agree to help your sister." "Then I'm calling the police," I said and resolutely pulled the phone out of my pocket, my fingers shaking, not from fear, but from rage, and began to dial a number. Dad, reacting instantly, grabbed my hand, and his grip was unexpectedly strong. "Don't be stupid," he said through clenched teeth. "Let me go," I demanded, breaking free, and when he refused, I jerked my hand so sharply that the phone screen almost fell out, but I held on tightly. "I'm calling them right now if you don't get out of my house right now." My voice sounded so firm and cold that they understood that I was not joking. Mom started crying even louder, her shoulders shaking slightly as she breathed out, "Okay, we're leaving, but this isn't over, Samantha. If anything happens to Sarah, it's on you." I lifted my chin and answered guardedly, "And if my financial security is at risk because I drop everything and save her from my own mistakes, it's on me. At least for now, The only person who has to bear the consequences is the one who got themselves into this mess in the first place. Dad clenched his fist, pointed a finger at me, and said in a low voice, "You'll regret this. Family is supposed to stick together." I chuckled, "You didn't think about that 5 years ago." They finally walked out the door, but before they left, Dad dropped a dark, almost threatening phrase about me knowing the consequences of my refusal. I locked the door and leaned my back against it, my heart pounding in my chest and my hands still shaking from the strain. The first thing I did was dial the realtor I'd spoken to a couple of weeks ago about putting my house on the market. "Hey, it's Samantha. Remember when we talked about putting my house on the market? I need to sell it fast. I'm willing to drop the price by 5% if that'll help speed things up." The man on the other end of the line paused for a second. Then said, "Well, the timing is interesting, but I have a potential buyer who's been looking at your neighborhood. At this discount, I think he'll be seriously interested. Let me make a few calls." 3 days later, he called back, and the offer was lower than I'd expected, but considering the speed and terms, it was fair. I accepted without hesitation. When I told Marcus about it, he was stunned. "Are you serious? Sell it that fast?" he asked. I explained, "My parents showed up at my house. I don't trust them, Marcus. I don't think they'll stop and they'll come after me, maybe even do something crazy. I'd rather sell the house and take the money somewhere they can't use against me." He sighed and said, "I guess that's a smart move. And you know, it means you can move in with me sooner than we planned." For the first time in days, his words made me smile. "Do you mind if I stay with you while I look for a new house in your area?" I asked, almost whispering. Marcus laughed, "Are you kidding? I was just hoping you'd move in with me. It just happened early." The deal went surprisingly quickly. Within a week, all the papers were signed, and the house was officially in its new owner. Marcus came to help me pack up and move it in. It was a relief not to be alone among the boxes and memories. As we loaded the last of the boxes into the van, I paused to look at the house again. I had been happy within these walls, I had worked tirelessly to afford it, but now, looking at the familiar windows and doors, I felt not pain, but the rightness of my decision. A new phase was beginning, and the family could no longer use this house as leverage. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Yeah, I'm okay. Let's go," I said. We left together, and I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Everything about Sarah and her debts no longer had anything to do with me, and I was finally free of their endless drama. Life with Marcus was surprisingly warm and cozy, his home was comfortable, working remotely allowed me to settle in quickly, and we spent our evenings browsing online, planning our future together. For the first time in months, I felt truly happy and light, like I could breathe again. A month passed, and I was getting used to the new rhythm, when my phone rang on Tuesday morning. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, but the area code was for my old hometown. "Is this Samantha Morrison?" I heard a voice on the other end of the line, sounding so dry and professional that my insides went cold. "Yes, it's me." "Who's calling?" I answered, feeling sweat start to break out on my palms. "This is Officer Martinez of the Riverside Police Department. I'm calling in regards to an incident involving your parents, Robert and Linda Morrison." My blood literally ran cold, and my breathing became ragged. "What incident?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Your parents were arrested last night for trespassing and vandalism. The landlord intends to file charges." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "Breaking and vandalism? Where did this happen?" The words came out with difficulty. "The address they broke into was listed as your former residence. 847 Maple Street. Was that your home?" the officer asked. I swallowed hard. "I sold this house a month ago. What could my parents possibly be doing there?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "That's exactly what we're trying to find out," Martinez replied. "They did a lot of damage to the interior, destroyed furniture, broken windows, graffiti on the walls. The new owner came home to find them in his living room swinging a baseball bat and smashing his coffee table. I almost dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" I asked, even though I knew no police officer would joke in that tone. "Extremely serious. The total damage is estimated at approximately $40,000. Your parents claimed that they believed you still owned the house and that you had somehow insulted them. They said they were there to get it all back to you." I sank heavily onto the couch next to Marcus, who immediately noticed how pale I had become. "Officer," I said, my voice shaking, "I have something to explain. My parents have been hounding me for weeks, demanding that I sell my house to help them with money. I refused, and they started making threats." "What threats?" Martinez asked calmly. And then I spilled the beans, about Sarah's debts, about their unexpected appearances on my doorstep, about the endless 5-year family drama that seemed to hang over my life like a dark cloud. The officer listened attentively, and sometimes I could only hear the scratch of his pen on paper. "So they didn't know you sold the house?" he asked. "Obviously not," I answered. "They probably came there thinking they'd destroy my property out of revenge, and they ended up destroying someone else's house." "That's exactly what it looks like," he confirmed. "The new owner is extremely upset. He's filing an insurance claim, but at the same time he wants your parents to be punished to the fullest extent of the law." "I understand," I said quietly, and the conversation came to an end. I hung up and relayed the story to Marcus, barely managing to control my emotions. He ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. "This is crazy, Samantha. They could have died. What if the owner had been armed? Do you realize that your parents risked being shot?" A new chill ran through me at those words. I hadn't even thought about it. Yes, with the current laws and mood, something irreparable could have happened, and all because of their stupid, desperate vendetta. The next few weeks were a constant wait for news from the police and occasional calls from old mutual friends. It turned out that Mom and Dad were facing some pretty serious charges, but their lawyer had managed to get them a deal. They'd plead guilty in exchange for a reduced prison sentence, but they'd have to pay the injured homeowner the full amount. $40,000 for property damage, plus legal fees, plus court costs. The total was about $60,000. One evening, my friend Jenny called, her voice both excited and sympathetic. "Samantha, I just found out. Your parents had to sell their house. They had no other option to pay the damages. They said it was their only asset and that at their age they'd never be able to buy another one. But here's the weird thing, after they paid off their debts, they gave the rest of the money to Sarah to help with her problems." I couldn't believe my ears. "So they ended up doing exactly what they wanted me to do, but at the cost of my house?" I breathed, my stomach clenching. "And that's not all," Jenny continued. "The whole story about Sarah's debts wasn't nearly as scary as she made it out to be. The so-called dangerous people were just a legitimate investment firm threatening to sue her. No broken knees, no mysterious accidents. Just regular lawsuits, boring and legal as they come." So the truth was both cruel and liberating. Sarah had lied about her life being in mortal danger, and the more I played it over in my head, the more I realized that she had staged the whole thing so skillfully that my parents would panic and put even more pressure on me, and the news hit me like a truck, sudden and devastating, leaving me empty and bitter. She manipulated all of us, especially our parents, into believing that her existence was in jeopardy, when in reality all that was threatening her was a banal lawsuit, the most common consequence of bad financial decisions. I asked Jenny where Mom and Dad lived now, and her answer sounded unreal. They rented a small apartment with Sarah and her husband David, the four of them cramped in a 2-room dwelling that, according to her, was far from in the best condition, and there were constant arguments and squabbles between them. And suddenly I felt a pang of pity, because despite all the anger and disappointment, they were still my parents, but it was not enough to reach out to them. I remembered too well every wound inflicted by their actions. Months passed, and I began to hear through mutual friends that the family was trying to get in touch with me, relaying requests through others for a meeting, for a conversation, for a chance to explain themselves, and each time I answered the same thing. no. Then one day Jenny called again and said, "Your mother asked me to tell you she's sorry. She said they realized how wrong they were about everything." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white and said, "It's too late for apologies. They didn't even ask if I was alive for 5 years, and then they came back only to demand that I go bankrupt for Sarah. And when I refused, they committed crimes to get their way. I'm done with it." Jenny sighed, "But this is your family, Samantha." And then I said the words that had been brewing inside me for a long time, "No, Jenny, that's not how family behaves. Real family doesn't abandon you for 5 years and then come back only to demand money. Real family doesn't hire private detectives to follow you. Real family doesn't break into someone's house with baseball bats." At that moment, Marcus, who had been sitting next to me and had heard my half of the conversation, reached out and squeezed my hand tightly. When I hung up, he looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Are you okay?" And I suddenly realized with a smile that for the first time in a long time I could honestly answer, "I'm totally fine. We found a house we both love, I'm doing well at work, and most importantly, I'm no longer caught up in their endless drama." Marcus smiled and paused before adding, "Speaking of the house we love, I've been thinking about something bigger than just buying it for a long time. We could buy it together and start a real life." And then he got down on one knee in the middle of his living room, pulled a small box out of his pocket, and opening it, he said, "Samantha, will you marry me?" Tears immediately came to my eyes, but they were tears of joy, pure and bright, and I could barely utter, "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." We got engaged that day, and the following weekend we proposed on the house, and when it was accepted, I felt like a new chapter in my life had truly begun. We began planning our wedding for the following year, and on quiet evenings I sometimes found myself thinking about my family, wondering if I had done the right thing by cutting them off from my life completely. But when I remembered how calm and fulfilling my life had become without the constant stress, lies, and manipulation, I knew I had done the right thing. Sarah had created her own misfortunes by making unwise deals and diving into dubious projects. Mom and Dad had chosen to protect her from the consequences rather than let her face the consequences of her mistakes, and they had all chosen to attack me when I refused to sacrifice my stability. They had chosen crime and destruction. I had chosen to build a life with someone who loved and supported me, to maintain my financial security and peace of mind, to surround myself with people who did not seek to pressure, threaten, or deceive. And as I sat with Marcus, discussing our wedding plans, and sometimes even tentatively talking about maybe having children someday, I knew I had made the best choice I could have made. I was succeeding and getting promoted at work, new horizons were opening up ahead, and for the first time in years, I could say without a doubt, I was happy. Real, deep, genuine happiness. And none of it would have been possible if I had let my family drag me back into their chaos. So no, I didn't regret closing the door on them for 1 second. Not 1 second.